The silence in a delivery room should be filled with awe. It should be filled with the soft, wet sounds of a newborn taking their first breath, the exhausted, tearful laughter of a mother, and the proud, trembling voice of a father. That is what I had dreamed of for 9 months. That is what I had prayed for during the long nights when my ankles were swollen and my back ached so much I couldn't sleep. But in my room, the silence was different. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, the kind that makes the air feel thin and cold, despite the sweat on my forehead. I held my daughter, Maya, against my chest. She was tiny, a little bundle of pink warmth wrapped in a hospital blanket that smelled of harsh detergent. She was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a tuft of dark hair that stuck up in every direction. My heart was overflowing, beating so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. I looked up, expecting to see tears in my husband's eyes. I expected to see Mark reaching out, his large, capable hands trembling as he touched the cheek of the child we had wanted for so long. Instead, I saw a stranger. Mark stood at the foot of the bed, his arms crossed tight over his chest. His jaw was set so hard a muscle twitched beneath his skin. He wasn't looking at me with love. He wasn't looking at Maya with pride. He was looking at us with a cold, detached disgust, as if we were a mistake he was trying to figure out how to correct. "Mark?" I whispered, my voice hoarse from the labor. "Mark, come see her. She has your chin." He didn't move. He didn't blink. "That's not my baby, Elena," he said. His voice was flat, calm. It didn't sound like a man in the throes of a breakdown. It sounded like a man stating a fact, like saying the sky is blue or the grass is green. I blinked, trying to clear the fog of exhaustion from my brain. I actually laughed a little, a weak, confused sound. "What? Honey, you're tired. It's been a long 24 hours. Come here." "I said," he repeated, louder this time, stepping back toward the door, "that is not my baby, and I am done playing the fool." Before I could process the words, before I could scream or cry or demand an explanation, he turned his back on us. The heavy hospital doors swung shut with a soft click, sealing me in that room with my newborn daughter and a heart that had just been shattered into dust. To understand how impossible, how insane this moment was, you have to understand who we were, or who I thought we were. Mark and I were the couple everyone else wanted to be. We met in our late 20s, both of us past the games of early youth, both of us ready to build something real. He was an architect, meticulous, steady, a man who built strong foundations for a living. I was a librarian, quiet and observant. We fit together like two puzzle pieces that had been waiting in the box for years. Our life was a series of gentle, happy rituals. I remember the Sunday mornings vividly, the smell of dark roast coffee and bacon drifting up the stairs. Mark would be in the kitchen, humming some old jazz tune, and he'd have a plate set out for me before I even walked in the room. He used to leave notes in my packed lunch, silly things. "I love you more than coffee," or "You're the roof over my head." When we decided to start a family, it wasn't a casual decision. We planned it. We painted the nursery together, a soft, calming sage green. I remember Mark standing on the ladder, a smudge of paint on his nose, looking down at me with a grin that made my knees weak. "I'm going to be the best dad, Elena," he had promised, climbing down to kiss my forehead. "I'm going to teach them how to build things, how to be strong." There was never a moment where I doubted him. There was never a late night where he didn't come home, never a suspicious text message, never a scent of perfume that wasn't mine. We were boring. We were stable. We were happy. Or so I thought. Looking back, memory is a tricky thing. It paints over the cracks. But lying in that hospital bed, alone, clutching a baby girl who had been rejected before she was even an hour old, I tried to search for the clues I must have missed. The pregnancy was normal, mostly. Mark had been attentive, attending every ultrasound, holding my hand when I was sick in the mornings. But towards the end, yes, there had been a shift, a subtle cooling. It started about 2 months before Maya was born. Mark had taken on a new project at work, a big commercial complex downtown. He said the stress was getting to him. He became quieter. He stopped humming in the kitchen. When I would place his hand on my belly to feel the baby kick, he would do it, but he'd pull away quickly, muttering about having to check an email or return a call. I told myself it was just anxiety. Men process fatherhood differently, my mother had told me. He's worried about providing, Elena. He's worried about the change. Give him space. So I gave him space. I poured my love into the nursery, folding tiny onesies and organizing diapers, assuming that the moment he saw the baby, the fear would vanish and the love would rush back in. I was wrong. The hours after he walked out of the hospital room were a blur of humiliation and terror. The nurses came in to check on me, their smiles faltering when they saw the empty chair where the father should be. I had to lie to them. He just went to get some food, I stammered, clutching Maya tighter. He has a weak stomach. They nodded, but their eyes held pity. They knew. Nurses always know. By the time evening fell, I hadn't heard a word from him. My phone lay on the bedside table, silent. I called him once, twice, a dozen times, straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Mark. Leave a message." His voice sounded so normal on the recording, so like the man I loved. "Mark," I sobbed into the phone, trying not to wake the baby. "Mark, please. I don't understand. She's yours. You know she's yours. There has never been anyone else. Please, just come back. We can talk about this." Nothing. The next morning, the hospital social worker came in. She was a kind woman with graying hair and a clipboard she held like a shield. "Mrs. Davis, is your husband coming in to sign the affidavit of paternity?" I felt the blood drain from my face. To leave the father's name blank, to start my daughter's life with a question mark where her father should be? "He's detained," I whispered, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "I see," she said. She didn't push. She just handed me a pen. When I was discharged 2 days later, Mark didn't come. My sister, Sarah, had to pick me up. She was furious, her face red with rage as she buckled Maya into the car seat. "I'm going to kill him," Sarah hissed, slamming the trunk shut. "I don't care what his excuse is, Elena. You don't leave your wife at the hospital." "He thinks I cheated," I said softly as we drove away from the place where my life had changed forever. The rain was streaking against the glass, blurring the world outside. "He said she isn't his." "That's delusional," Sarah snapped. "You were with him every single day. Who does he think you cheated with? The mailman?" "I don't know," I said softly. But the real horror was waiting for me at home. When Sarah pulled into the driveway of our beautiful suburban home, the home Mark and I had picked out together, I saw something that made my stomach turn over. Mark's car was gone. That wasn't surprising, but the front door was slightly ajar. "Stay here," Sarah said, unbuckling her seatbelt. "No," I said, opening my door. "It's my house." I walked up the path, my body still aching from the birth, holding my sleeping daughter in her carrier. I pushed the door open. The house echoed. It wasn't just quiet, it was hollow. I walked into the living room. The TV was gone. The paintings, the ones we bought on our honeymoon in Charleston, were gone from the walls, leaving rectangular outlines of dust. I walked to the bedroom. His clothes were gone, his shoes, his books, his nightstand. But he hadn't just taken his things. I went to the nursery, the room I had decorated with so much love. He had taken the crib. He had taken the changing table. He had taken the rocking chair. The room was empty, save for the sage green paint on the walls. On the floor, in the center of the empty room, was a single piece of paper. I handed the baby carrier to my sister who had followed me, and I picked up the note. It was in Mark's handwriting, sharp, precise block letters. In the letter, sharp, precise block letters. I'm filing for divorce. My lawyer will contact you. I won't pay a dime for another man's bastard. Don't try to find me." I fell to my knees on the carpet, the paper crumpling in my fist. The cruelty of it was so absolute, so thorough, that my brain couldn't process the grief yet. I just felt shock. How could a man sleep beside you for 5 years, listen to your heartbeat, share your bread, and then turn into a monster overnight? I looked at Maya, sleeping peacefully in my sister's arms, unaware that her father had just declared war on her existence. "He thinks he can just walk away," I whispered, a cold resolve slowly starting to rise beneath the agony. I stood up, wiping the tears from my face. The house was empty, but I wasn't. "He's wrong," I told my sister, "and I'm going to prove it." But I had no idea then. The first night in that empty house was the longest of my life. My sister, Sarah, tried to get me to come back to her place, but I refused. I sat on a mattress we had dragged from the guest room onto the living room floor, nursing Maya in the darkness. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Every shadow looked like Mark returning to tell me it was all a bad joke. But he didn't come back. The next few weeks were a blur of survival. I was operating on autopilot. Feed the baby, change the baby, cry in the shower so she wouldn't hear me, repeat. The reality of what Mark had done didn't hit me all at once. It came in waves, each one colder and harder than the last. The first wave was the bank account. I went to the grocery store to buy formula and diapers, the expensive kind, because Maya had sensitive skin. When I swiped our joint debit card, the machine made a harsh buzzing sound. Declined. I tried again. Declined. My hands started to shake. The cashier, a teenage girl popping gum, looked at me with bored impatience. "Do you have another card?" I pulled out my credit card. Declined. I stood there, my face burning, while the line of people behind me shifted and sighed. I had to leave the cart there. I walked out to the parking lot, sat in my car, and called the bank. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Davis," the teller said, her voice sounding tinny over the phone. "The joint savings and checking accounts were closed 3 days ago. The balance was withdrawn via cashier's check." "All of it?" I choked out. "Our house savings, the emergency fund?" "Yes, ma'am, by Mr. Mark Davis." He had left me with $12 in my wallet and a newborn baby. That was the moment the sadness turned into something else. It turned into a hard, cold knot in my stomach. This wasn't just heartbreak. This was a calculated destruction. Mark wasn't just leaving. He was trying to erase me. I had to hire a lawyer, but I couldn't afford one. I ended up with a court-appointed representative, a weary man named Mr. Henderson, who smelled like stale tobacco and looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "It's going to be tough," Henderson told me, shuffling through the papers Mark's high-priced legal team had sent over. "He's filed for a fault-based divorce, addendary. He's petitioning to deny paternity and refuse child support." "But she is his." I slammed my hand on the desk. "I want a DNA test right now. I want him to look at the results and tell me to my face that he isn't the father." "We can request it," Henderson sighed, "but his lawyers are stalling. They're claiming you have a history of instability. They're burying us in paperwork." And that's exactly what they did. For 6 months, I lived in a nightmare of legal motions and delays. Mark was nowhere to be found. He communicated only through his lawyers. He didn't come to the hearings. He didn't ask about Maya. I had to sell the house. I couldn't afford the mortgage on my own, especially with Mark refusing to pay a cent. I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment near Sarah. It had thin walls and a view of a dumpster, a far cry from the sage-green nursery and the suburban lawn. But in that small apartment, amidst the struggle, I found my strength. I looked at Maya one evening. She was 6 months old, sitting up on the rug, chewing on a plastic ring. She had Mark's eyes, that deep, thoughtful hazel, but she had my smile. "I don't need him," I whispered to her. "We don't need him." Finally, a year after Maya was born, the court ordered the DNA test. Mark couldn't dodge it any longer. The judge, a stern woman who seemed tired of the delays, set a date. I showed up at the lab with Maya, my heart pounding. I was ready for vindication. I was ready to shove that piece of paper in Mark's face and demand the child support he owed us. I waited in the waiting room for 2 hours. Mark never showed up. Instead, his lawyer arrived looking flustered. He went into the back room with the lab technician, then came out and spoke to the judge on a conference call. Mark had left the country. Apparently, he had taken a job in Dubai. He had liquidated his assets, quit his firm, and boarded a plane 48 hours before the test. He was gone, beyond the reach of the state family court. The judge was furious. She granted me the divorce by default. She granted me full custody. She ordered Mark to pay maximum child support and alimony. But a court order is just a piece of paper if the man is thousands of miles away in a jurisdiction that doesn't easily enforce it. I walked out of the courthouse that day feeling hollow. I had won, but I had lost everything. I had no husband, no money, and no answer to the question that haunted me every night. Why? Why did he hate us so much? What had I done to make a good man turn so cruel? Life moved on, as it always does. The sharp edge of grief dulled into a dull ache. I went back to work at the library. I raised my daughter. 5 years passed. Maya grew into a bright, curious, and sensitive little girl. We were a team, her and I. We had our rituals: pancakes on Saturdays, library visits on Tuesdays, movie nights on Fridays. We were happy, in our own way, but the ghost of her father was always there. It started when she turned 5 and started kindergarten. Other dads came to pick up their kids. Other dads carried them on their shoulders. One afternoon, Maya came home quiet. She sat at the kitchen table, drawing with her crayons, pressing down so hard the wax crumbled. "Mommy?" she asked, not looking up. "Yes, baby?" "Timmy said everyone has a daddy. He said if I don't have one, it means he didn't want me." My heart broke into a million pieces right there in the kitchen. I knelt down beside her, taking her small hands in mine. "Look at me, Maya," I said, my voice trembling. "Your daddy, he was sick, not in his body, but in his heart. He got confused. It had nothing to do with you. You are the most wanted, loved girl in the world. I wanted you enough for 2 parents." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. The seed of rejection had been planted. I hated Mark then. I hated him more than I had on the day he left me at the hospital. He wasn't just hurting me anymore. He was hurting her. I thought that was the end of it. I thought Mark was just a dark chapter in our history book, a page we had turned. But the past has a funny way of not staying buried. It was a Tuesday in November. The leaves were turning brown and the air was crisp. I had just put Maya to bed and was sorting through the mail. Mostly bills, a flyer for a pizza place, and a thick official-looking envelope from the Department of State. I frowned. I wasn't expecting anything from the government. I tore it open. Inside was a letter. It wasn't about taxes. It wasn't about my car registration. It was a notification regarding the repatriation of a U.S. citizen. "Dear Ms. Elena Davis, we are writing to inform you regarding the status of Mr. Mark Davis." I scanned the lines, my breath hitching in my throat. Mark was back. He had been deported from Dubai due to a visa violation and was currently held in a federal detention center in our state, pending release. But that wasn't the part that made the room spin. Attached to the letter was a copy of his intake form, and under the section for dependents, it didn't list Maya. It listed a boy, Leo Davis, age 6. I dropped the letter. The paper fluttered to the floor, landing face up. Age 6. Maya was 5. If this boy was 6, that meant he was born a year before Maya. That meant while Mark was painting our nursery, while he was holding my hand and promising to be a good father, while he was playing the role of the devoted husband, he already had a son. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. Everything suddenly snapped into focus. The stress at work, the late nights, the sudden accusation that I was the cheater. It is the oldest trick in the book, isn't it? The thief is always the first to check his own pockets. The liar is always the first to accuse you of lying. Rage, hot and blinding, flooded my veins. It was different from the sadness I had felt 5 years ago. This was fire. I picked up the phone. I didn't call my sister. I didn't call my mom. I called the number at the bottom of the letter. I need to speak to the case manager for Mark Davis, and then I need to speak to a lawyer, a shark. Mark was back, and this time he wasn't going to be the one walking away. The next morning, I didn't go to the library. I walked into the office of a woman named Rebecca Vance. She was known around town as the Barracuda, a divorce attorney who wore power suits that cost more than my car and who had a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I placed the Department of State letter on her mahogany desk. "He's back," I said, "and he has a son who is older than my daughter." Rebecca picked up the paper with 2 manicured fingers, scanning it. Her eyebrows lifted just a fraction of an inch. "Well," she purred, "this changes things. The statute of limitations on the fraud he committed, it paused the day he left the jurisdiction. He thinks he's returning to a clean slate. He's about to find out he's walking into a minefield." We filed the motion that afternoon: emergency custody hearing, reinstatement of child support, and, most importantly, a court-ordered DNA test to be administered immediately under the supervision of a bailiff so he couldn't run again. Mark was served the papers as he walked out of the federal detention center. I wasn't there to see it, but the process server told me Mark turned a shade of pale, usually reserved for dead fish. 2 weeks later, I saw him. The court-ordered mediation was held in a sterile conference room with gray carpet and buzzing fluorescent lights. I sat on one side of the long table, Rebecca next to me. When the door opened, the air in the room seemed to spoil. Mark walked in. He looked different. The 5 years in Dubai had tanned his skin, but it had also aged him. His hair was thinning at the temples. He wore a suit that looked expensive, but fit him poorly, as if he had lost weight recently. He didn't look at me. He looked at the wall, at the floor, at his lawyer, anywhere but at the woman he had abandoned. "Mr. Davis," Rebecca started, her voice smooth and dangerous, "welcome back." Mark cleared his throat. "Let's just get this over with. I don't have money. The repatriation took everything. If she wants child support, she's squeezing water from a stone." I spoke for the first time. My voice was surprisingly steady. "I don't just want the money, Mark. I want the truth." He finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, filled with that same arrogant disgust he had shown in the hospital room. "The truth? The truth is you pinned another man's kid on me because you wanted a payout. I left because I couldn't stand looking at you." My hands clenched into fists under the table. Even now, trapped and cornered, he was sticking to the lie. It was almost impressive in its sociopathy. "We have the results," Rebecca said, sliding a sealed white envelope across the table. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Mark stared at the envelope. He made no move to open it. "Open it." He sneered. "I don't need to read a piece of paper to know what I know. Open it." Mark ripped the envelope open with a jerky, angry motion. He pulled out the single sheet of paper. His eyes scanned the lines. I watched his face. I saw the moment the air left his lungs. I saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed. 99.9%, Rebecca read aloud from her own copy. "Probability of paternity, Mark Davis. She is your daughter, Mark. She has always been your daughter." He dropped the paper. He slumped back in his chair, running a hand over his face. The arrogance began to crack, revealing the coward underneath. The test is flawed, he mumbled, but there was no heat in it. The test is definitive, Rebecca snapped, and now that we have established paternity, we move to the arrears. You owe 5 years of child support, you owe alimony, and we will garnish every paycheck, seize every asset, and place a lien on any property you acquire until it is paid. Mark let out a bitter laugh. I told you I have nothing. I have a new family to support. I can't pay her. Ah, I said, leaning forward, the new family. Mark froze. Leo, I said the name softly. He's 6 years old, isn't he? Mark's head snapped up. Panic, real and raw, flooded his eyes. How do you know that name? I know that he was born a year before Maya. I know that while you were painting our nursery, while you were playing the doting husband, you already had a son. You didn't leave because I cheated. You left because your double life was about to collapse. You projected your guilt on me. You accused me of the very thing you were doing. Mark looked at his lawyer, then back at me. He looked like a trapped animal. Who is she, Mark? I asked. Who is the mother? Does she know about me? Does she know you abandoned a newborn baby in the hospital to run back to her? He stayed silent. We'll find her, Rebecca said, closing her folder with a sharp snap. We will depose her. We will bring her into this room, and we will find out exactly where the marital assets went 5 years ago. Mark slammed his hand on the table. Leave her out of this. She has nothing to do with you. She has everything to do with this, I yelled, finally losing my composure. You stole our life. You stole my daughter's father, and you did it for her. Mark stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You don't understand, he hissed. You were the mistake, Elena. You were the boring, safe option, but she was real. I never loved you. I was just trying to do the right thing until I couldn't take it anymore. The cruelty of his words hung in the air. I never loved you. It should have crushed me. 5 years ago, it would have destroyed me. But now it just clarified things. Thank you, I said, standing up to meet his gaze. Thank you for finally admitting it. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. I'm going to take everything, Mark. Not for me, but for Maya. And then I'm going to have a long talk with the mother of your son. I walked out of the mediation room, my legs trembling, but my head held high. I went home to my apartment, hugged Maya tightly, and made us dinner, but my mind was racing. I needed to find the other woman, not to hurt her, but because I had a sinking suspicion that she might be a victim in this too. Mark was a liar, and liars rarely lie to just one person. Rebecca's investigator found her within 2 days. Her name was Chloe. She lived in a small, rundown house on the edge of town, the same town we lived in. She hadn't been in Dubai with him. He had been wiring money to her, keeping her hidden here while he worked overseas. I sat in my car outside her house on a rainy Thursday morning. I watched as a young boy, Leo, ran out to catch the school bus. He had dark hair, he had Mark's chin. It was undeniable. Once the bus pulled away, I took a deep breath. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look like a vengeful ex-wife. I looked like a woman who wanted answers. I got out of the car and walked up the cracked concrete path to her front door. I knocked. A moment later, the door opened. A woman stood there. She was younger than me, perhaps early 30s. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing a stained, oversized t-shirt. Yes? She asked, guarding the door. Hi, I'm Elena Davis. I forced a gentle smile. I watched her face for a reaction. I expected shock. I expected anger. I expected her to slam the door. Instead, she frowned, looking confused. Davis? She repeated. Like Mark Davis? Yes, I'm Mark's wife, or ex-wife, technically. Chloe blinked. She let out a small, confused laugh. I'm sorry, you must have the wrong house. Mark isn't married. He's never been married. He's my fiancé. We've been together for 7 years. My heart stopped. 7 years? That overlapped with my entire marriage. He told you he was never married? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Yeah, Chloe said, getting defensive now, stepping back to close the door. Look, lady, I don't know who you are, but Mark is a good man. He's been working his tail off in Dubai to support us. He's had a hard life. His parents died when he was young. He has no family. Mark's parents live in Ohio. They came to our wedding in 2016. Chloe froze. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. The color drained from her face. I have pictures, I said, reaching into my purse. I have pictures of our wedding, pictures of our house, pictures of our daughter, Maya. I held out a photo. It was me and Mark cutting our wedding cake. He looked happy. He looked adoring. Chloe looked at the photo. Her hands started to shake. She looked up at me, and I saw her world crumbling just like mine had 5 years ago. He told me, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. He told me he was a secret agent. That's why he was gone so much. That's why he couldn't tell people about us. I stared at her. A secret agent? The lie was so absurd, so childish, yet so effective for a man who needed to explain long absences. May I come in? I asked gently. Chloe stepped back, opening the door wide. And in that moment, the dynamic changed. We weren't rivals. We weren't enemies fighting over a man. We were 2 women who had been conned by the same monster. And as I walked into her living room, seeing the poverty she lived in while Mark had supposedly been earning big money in Dubai, I realized the rabbit hole went deeper than I thought. I sat on Chloe's worn-out beige sofa, a cup of lukewarm instant coffee in my hands. The house smelled of damp wood and cheap lemon air freshener, the scent of someone trying desperately to cover up poverty. The table between us was covered in paper. On the left, my life, wedding photos, bank statements, Maya's birth certificate. On the right, Chloe's life, a stack of handwritten letters from the field, Western Union receipts for small sporadic amounts of money, and photos of Leo growing up without a father present. He told me he was in Afghanistan in 2017, Chloe said, her voice trembling as she traced a finger over a photo of Mark and me at a pumpkin patch. The date stamp on the back read October 2017. He wasn't, I said softly. He was working at the firm downtown. He came home every night at 6 p.m. He told me his assets were frozen by the NSA, she continued, tears streaming down her face, that he had millions saved for us, for Leo's college, but he couldn't touch it until the operation was over. That's why we live like this. That's why I work double shifts at the diner. I thought I was sacrificing for a hero. I looked around the room, the peeling wallpaper, the drafty windows, the distinct lack of toys for a 6-year-old boy. Mark hadn't just cheated on me. He had starved this woman and her child while he lived in comfort with me. And then, when he got bored of the domestic routine with me, he ran off to Dubai, not to support Chloe, but to escape both of us. He's not a hero, Chloe, I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Her skin was rough, calloused from hard work. He's a vampire. He feeds on trust. He took my money and he took your time. He's coming here, she whispered, looking at the clock. He called me before you arrived. He said his lawyer needs me to sign something, an affidavit saying he's been the primary provider for Leo, so the court won't make him pay you as much. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a hunter who just heard the twigs snap. Is he? I asked. Good. What are we going to do? Chloe asked, wiping her eyes. She looked terrified. She had spent 7 years worshiping a man who didn't exist. The fall from that height is devastating. We're not going to do anything violent, I said, channeling a calm I didn't know I possessed. We're going to let him dig his own grave.
When he comes, I want you to let him in. I'll be in the kitchen. Let him talk. Let him say exactly what he wants you to sign." Chloe took a deep breath. She looked at the photo of Leo on the mantel. "He promised Leo a bike," she choked out. "For 3 years. He never got it." That small detail, the bike, was the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't the thousands of dollars or the secret agent lies. It was the disappointment of a little boy waiting for a father who never delivered. An hour later, we heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. I moved into the small kitchen, standing just behind the doorframe where I could hear everything but couldn't be seen. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. The front door opened. "Babe, I'm home," Mark's voice. It was jovial, confident, the voice of a man who thought he had all his chess pieces under control. "Hi, Mark," Chloe said, her voice shaking, but Mark in his arrogance clearly mistook it for nerves or awe. "Hey," he said. I heard the rustle of a jacket being taken off. "I missed you. God, the lawyers are dragging me through the mud. That woman, Elena, she's vicious. She's trying to ruin us." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. "Is she?" Chloe asked. "Oh, completely crazy," Mark sighed. "She's making up lies about the money. She's trying to take everything so I can't take care of you and Leo. But don't worry, I have a plan. I just need you to sign this paper. It just says the judge that I've been sending you cash for years. It proves I'm a good dad." "But you haven't sent much, Mark," Chloe said. "We've been struggling." I know, he soothed, his voice dropping to that manipulative low register I remembered so well. "But the big money is coming. As soon as I get this divorce settled and get her off my back, the government bonds unlock. We'll buy a mansion. Just sign the paper, baby. Do it for Leo." There it was, the leverage. Do it for the child. "Read it to me," Chloe said. She was sticking to the script I gave her. "It just says, 'I, Chloe, attest that Mark Davis has provided $5,000 monthly for the care of our son.'" $5,000? Chloe cracked. "Mark, I haven't seen $5,000 in a whole year." "It's just for the court, Chloe. It's a technicality. Do you want me to go to jail? Do you want Leo's dad in prison?" His voice was getting sharper, the nice guy mask slipping. I decided it was time. I stepped out of the kitchen. "He's not going to prison for lack of payment, Chloe," I said, my voice cutting through the damp air like a knife. "He's going to prison for perjury and fraud." Mark spun around. The look on his face was worth every tear I had shed for 5 years. It wasn't just fear, it was a total system failure. His mouth opened and closed. His eyes darted from me to Chloe and back again. He looked like a computer that had just been doused in water. "Elena?" he croaked. What are you doing here?" "Comparing notes," I said, walking further into the room. I picked up the secret agent letters from the table. "Did you know that the CIA doesn't usually use stationery from the Marriott in downtown Cleveland? I checked the watermarks, Mark." Mark backed up, hitting the wall. You two have no right." "We have every right," Chloe said, standing up. Her tail seemed taller suddenly, stronger. "You lied to me for 7 years. You aren't a spy. You're just an architect who got fired for embezzlement." Mark froze. "How did you—" "I called your old firm while Chloe was making coffee. I asked why you really left 5 years ago. They didn't want to press charges because they wanted to avoid a scandal, so they let you resign. That's why you ran to Dubai. It wasn't a job transfer. It was running from a lawsuit." Mark's face turned a violent shade of red. "You are trespassing. Get out of my house." "It's not your house," Chloe spat. "It's my name on the lease. You made sure of that, remember? For security reasons. So get out." Mark straightened his jacket, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "Fine. You want to play it this way? Fine. Neither of you gets a dime. I'll declare bankruptcy. I'll disappear again. You'll never find me." He turned to the door, but the door was already open. Standing in the doorway was Rebecca Vance, my shark of a lawyer, and behind her were 2 uniformed police officers. "Actually, Mr. Davis, you won't be disappearing anywhere. You missed your check-in with the bailiff this morning to come here. That's a violation of your bond." "And," one of the officers added, stepping forward with handcuffs, "we have a warrant regarding the falsified financial documents you submitted to the federal court yesterday. Perjury is a felony, son." Mark looked at the handcuffs. He looked at me. He looked at Chloe. "Babe," he pleaded, turning back to Chloe, tears suddenly springing to his eyes. "Babe, don't let them take me. Think of Leo." Chloe looked at the man she had loved for 7 years. She looked at the handcuffs. "I am thinking of Leo," she said, her voice ice cold. "I'm thinking he deserves better than a liar." She turned her back on him. I watched as the officers cuffed him. Mark Davis, the architect, the spy, the father of 2 abandoned children, was marched out of the house into the rain. He looked small. He looked pathetic. As the police cruiser pulled away, silence fell over the house. I looked at Chloe. She slumped onto the sofa and put her face in her hands. She began to sob, deep, wrenching sobs of a woman mourning a life that never existed. I sat down beside her and put my arm around her shoulders. "It's over," I whispered. "The lie is over." "What do we do now?" she asked, looking up, her mascara running down her cheeks. "I have nothing, Elena. He was my whole world." "No," I said firmly. "He was a parasite, and now you have the truth. And you have me." I meant it. In that moment, I realized that my victory wasn't seeing Mark in handcuffs. That was just justice. The victory was realizing that he hadn't destroyed us. He had tried to pit us against each other, to use us as pawns in his game, but we had survived. "We're going to get the money," I told her. "Rebecca will find where he hid it. And we're going to raise these kids, because they are siblings, Chloe. Leo and Maya, they are brother and sister. They deserve to know each other." Chloe looked at me, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time. But Mark wasn't done yet. Even from a jail cell, a narcissist tries to control the narrative. The public fallout was just beginning, and I had to prepare myself for the whispers of a small town that loves a scandal more than the truth.
In a small town, a scandal is like a grease fire. You can try to throw water on it, but that only makes it spread faster and burn hotter. By the time the sun set on the day of Mark's arrest, the story had already leaped from phone to phone, from porch to porch. "Did you hear? Mark Davis wasn't in Dubai. He was living a double life. 2 wives? No, 1 wife and a fiancé. The police dragged him out in handcuffs." I went to the grocery store 2 days later. I needed milk for Maya, but mostly I needed to show my face. My mother always taught me, if you haven't done anything wrong, you never hide. Shame is for the guilty. As I pushed my cart down the cereal aisle, the whispering stopped. Heads turned. I saw Mrs. Gable, the town gossip, pretending to study a box of oatmeal with intense fascination. I saw the pity in some eyes, the morbid curiosity in others. I held my head high. I wore my favorite blue coat. I didn't look like a victim. But the real public reckoning wasn't in the grocery store. It was on my front lawn 3 days later. A silver sedan with Ohio plates pulled into my driveway, screeching to a halt. My stomach dropped. I knew that car. It belonged to Mark's parents, Brenda and heavy-set, red-faced George. They hadn't spoken to me in 5 years. When Mark left, they had taken his side without question. They believed I was the adulterer. They believed Maya wasn't their blood. I stepped out onto the porch, crossing my arms against the chill. Brenda marched up the walkway, her purse swinging aggressively. George followed, looking uncomfortable. "You," Brenda spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You vindictive, hateful woman." "Hello, Brenda," I said calmly. "Don't you hello me," she screamed, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "We just came from the county jail. My son is sitting in a cell because of you. He told us everything. He told us how you set him up, how you and some tramp conspired to ruin his reputation because he wouldn't pay your extortion money." I felt a flash of anger, but I tamped it down. Mark had gotten to them first. He had spun one last desperate web of lies. "Mark is a liar, Brenda," I said. "He's been lying to all of us." "My son is a good man," she shrieked. "He's a respected architect. He was working for the government. And you kept his daughter from him." "I didn't keep her," I said, my voice rising just enough to be firm. "He abandoned her because he said she wasn't his. Remember? You sent me a card that Christmas saying you didn't want to see the illegitimate child." Brenda's face flushed. Well, that was... "And he wasn't working for the government," I continued, stepping off the porch. "He was living 5 miles away with another woman and another child." "Lies!" Brenda yelled. "He doesn't have another child." I had anticipated this. I had texted Chloe earlier that morning when I saw the news that Mark's parents were in town visiting the jail. A second car pulled up to the curb, Chloe's beat-up Honda. She got out. She looked nervous, but she held Leo's hand tight. Brenda and George froze. They looked at Chloe, then slowly their eyes drifted down to the 6-year-old boy standing beside her. Leo looked up, blinking against the sun. He looked exactly like Mark did in his childhood photos. The same nose, the same cowlick in his hair, the same confused frown. Who is this?" George asked, his voice cracking. "This is Leo," I said, walking over to stand beside Chloe. We stood shoulder to shoulder, a united front. "This is your grandson. He's 6. Mark has been hiding him from you, just like he hid Maya from him." Brenda stared at the boy. The hand she had been pointing at me dropped to her side. The anger in her face began to crumble into shock. "6," Brenda whispered. But Mark said he met you in Dubai last year." "I've never been to Dubai," Chloe said softly. "We've lived on Elm Street for 7 years. Mark told you were dead." The silence that followed was heavy. The wind rustled the dry leaves on the lawn. "Dead," George repeated. "He told you were dead?" "He told you died in a car crash in 2015, Chloe said, reaching into her bag to pull out a photo. It was a picture of Mark holding baby Leo. Brenda looked at the photo. She looked at her husband, and then the realization hit her. The weight of it, the sheer massive scale of the deception. Her son hadn't just lied to his wives, he had erased his parents to cover his tracks. She began to cry. Not the angry, screaming tears of before, but the broken, weeping sobs of a mother realizing her son is a monster. I didn't know," Brenda sobbed, covering her mouth. "I didn't know." "I know," I said, my voice softening. "I didn't hate them anymore. They were just casualties like the rest of us. Would you like to meet them properly?" That afternoon, my living room was full. It was the strangest, most heartbreaking, most beautiful gathering. Chloe sat on the rug with Leo. I sat on the sofa with Maya. Brenda and George sat in the armchairs, looking between the 2 grandchildren they had never known existed. Maya, innocent and sweet, walked over to Leo. "Do you like Legos?" asked her him. Leo nodded shyly. "Yeah. I have the spaceship one." "I have the castle one. Do you want to build a castle ship?" "Okay," Leo said, a small smile breaking on his face. As I watched my daughter play with her half-brother, a knot in my chest that had been tight for 5 years finally loosened. Mark had tried to keep them apart. He had tried to keep all of us in separate boxes to serve his own ego. But the truth has a gravity of its own. It pulls things together. The legal hammer came down 2 weeks later. Rebecca, my shark of a lawyer, was true to her word.
During the discovery phase for the fraud trial, the forensic accountants found the money. Mark hadn't spent it all. He had stashed nearly $500,000 in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, money he had siphoned from our joint savings, money he had skimmed from his old firm, and money he had hidden from Chloe. The judge was merciless. The assets were frozen and seized. The court ordered immediate restitution. The money was split. Half went to repay the firm he stole from. The other half, Mark's personal savings, was divided between me and Chloe for back child support and damages. It wasn't a fortune, it wasn't enough to make us rich, but it was enough to pay off Chloe's debts. It was enough to start a college fund for Maya and Leo. It was enough to close the door on the poverty he had forced us into. Mark took a plea deal. To avoid a 20-year sentence for wire fraud and perjury, he pled guilty. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. I went to the sentencing. Chloe didn't. She said she was done wasting time on him. I sat in the back row. When the judge read the sentence, Mark looked back. He scanned the room, looking for someone, anyone, to give him a sympathetic look. His parents weren't there. They had gone back to Ohio to process their grief. Chloe wasn't there. It was just me. Our eyes met. He looked older, smaller, stripped of his expensive suits and his arrogance. He looked like what he was, a sad, broken man who had built a house of cards in a hurricane. I didn't smile, I didn't frown, I just nodded once, a gesture of finality. Goodbye, Mark. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. The air smelled of spring. The snow was melting, revealing the green grass underneath. I took out my phone. I had a text from Chloe. Leo is asking if Maya can come over for pizza tonight. He wants to show her his new bike. I smiled, typing back. We'll be there at 6. The storm was over. The wreckage was cleared. Now it was time to build something new. You might think that once the gavel bangs and the bad man goes away, the sun immediately comes out and everything is perfect. That's how it happens in the movies. The screen fades to black, the music swells, and everyone smiles. But real life isn't a movie. Real life is messy, and the debris left behind by a hurricane like Mark takes a long time to clear away. The first year after Mark went to prison was the hardest. Not financially, we were stable now, but emotionally. It was a year of explaining the unexplainable to 2 small children who missed a father they didn't really know. It started with the nightmares. About 3 months after the sentencing, Maya woke up screaming. I rushed into her room, my heart pounding, to find her sitting up in bed, her face wet with tears. "He's coming to take the furniture," she sobbed. "He's taking my chair." It broke me. She was 5 years old, yet she carried the trauma of that first abandonment, the day the nursery was emptied. It was buried deep in her subconscious. I held her until she fell back asleep, singing the same lullaby I used to hum when she was a newborn. But I didn't sleep that night. I sat by her window, watching the streetlights, wondering if the damage he did would ever fully heal. And it wasn't just Maya. Chloe called me a few days later. Her voice sounded thin, exhausted. "Elena," she said, "Leo got in a fight at school today." "Leo?" I asked. Leo was a gentle soul, quiet and sensitive. What happened? A kid teased him, said his dad was a jailbird. Leo, he pushed the kid. He screamed that his dad was a secret agent. My heart sank. The lie was still alive in that little boy's heart. He was clinging to the hero version of his father because the reality that his father was a con man was too painful to accept. I drove over to Chloe's house immediately. We sat on her porch while the kids played in the yard. They were chasing fireflies, their laughter ringing out in the twilight. It was a beautiful sound, contrasting sharply with the heavy conversation we were having. "I don't know what to tell him," Chloe whispered, twisting a napkin in her hands. "Do I destroy the fantasy? Do I tell him his dad is a liar? He's only 6, Elena." If we lie to them, I said slowly, we become like Mark. We can't build their lives on a foundation of sand. We have to give them the truth. Maybe not the whole ugly truth, but enough. We decided to do it together. We sat them down the next Sunday. We told them that their daddy made some bad choices, that he broke the rules, and when grown-ups break big rules, they have to go to a timeout called prison. We told them he loved them, but he didn't know how to be a good dad right now. It was hard. There were tears. Leo threw his toy truck across the room. Maya went quiet, but it was the truth, and once it was out, the healing could actually begin. As the months rolled by, a strange and beautiful rhythm developed between our two households. We were the ex-wives club, though we never called ourselves that. We were just family. We spent Thanksgiving together. It made sense. Neither of us wanted to be alone, and the kids wanted to be together. I remember looking around the table that Thanksgiving. It was at my apartment. I had roasted a turkey, a little dry if I'm honest, and Chloe had made her famous sweet potato casserole. My sister Sarah was there, and even Mark's parents, Brenda and George, had driven down from Ohio. That was the biggest surprise, Brenda and George. After the shock of the trial wore off, they had reached out. They were humble, broken people. They had lost their son to his own greed, but they had gained 2 grandchildren. They tried so hard to make up for lost time. They brought gifts, they sat on the floor and played Legos. They didn't talk about Mark. They just loved the kids. At dinner, George stood up to make a toast. His hand shook as he held up his glass of sparkling cider. "To family," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "the one we're born with and the one we choose. And to Elena and Chloe for saving these children." I teared up. Chloe squeezed my hand under the table. We had survived. But Mark wasn't done with us yet. It was a Tuesday in January, a gray, slushy day. I checked the mail and found a plain white envelope with a federal prison stamp. My blood ran cold. I didn't open it. I drove straight to the dinner where Chloe was working her shift. I waited for her to take her break, and we sat in a booth in the back corner. I placed the envelope on the table. "It's from him," I said. Chloe stared at it like it was a bomb. "What does he want?" "I don't know. Do we open it?" Chloe hesitated, then nodded. "We have to know." I used a butter knife to slit the envelope open. I unfolded the lined yellow paper. Mark's handwriting had changed. It was scrawlier, less precise, desperate. I read it aloud, my voice keeping a steady, flat tone. "Dear Elena and Chloe, I hope you're happy. I hope you're enjoying the money you stole from me. It's cold in here. The food is garbage. I think about you every day. I've been thinking, when I get out in 7 years, I want to see the kids. I have rights. I'm going to petition for visitation. You can't keep them from me forever. Leo needs a father. Maya needs a father. Don't think you've won. This isn't over. Mark." Silence hung heavy in the booth. The diner clatter seemed to fade away. I looked at Chloe. I expected to see fear. I expected to see that old panic return to her eyes. But instead, she started to laugh. It was a dry, incredulous laugh. She shook her head, taking a sip of her coffee. "He still doesn't get it," she said. "He's sitting in a concrete box wearing a jumpsuit, and he still thinks he's the one in control. You stole from me. Can you believe that?" "He's a narcissist," I said, folding the letter back up. "He will never change. He will never take responsibility. It will always be our fault." "So what do we do? Do we write back? Do we get a lawyer?" I looked at the letter. It was a piece of paper, just a piece of paper from a ghost. "No," I said firmly. "We don't give him the oxygen. We don't give him the satisfaction of knowing he scared us. We send it to Rebecca to put in the file just in case he ever actually tries for visitation, but we don't respond." I took the letter and ripped it in half, then in quarters. He chose his life, and we chose ours. We walked out of the dinner into the cold air, but I didn't feel cold. I felt lighter. That letter was his last attempt to exert power, and it had failed. He was the past. We were the future. The years began to move faster after that. Leo and Maya grew up like cousins who were closer than siblings. They went to the same school, they defended each other on the playground. When Maya got braces, Leo made her a card. When Leo made the varsity soccer team, Maya was the loudest one in the bleachers. We never hid the truth from them, but we stopped letting it define them. Mark became a footnote in their story, not the headline. 7 years passed. The day of Mark's release date approached. The kids were teenagers now, 13 and 14. They were old enough to understand everything. I sat them down in the living room. Chloe was there too. "Your father is getting out next week," I told them. The room went quiet. I watched their faces closely. I was ready to protect them, to fight for them, to hire security if I had to. Maya looked up from her phone. She looked so much like me now, but with a strength I didn't have at her age. "Does he know where we live?" she asked. "He might, but he can't come here. There's a restraining order." Leo leaned back on the sofa, spinning a soccer ball in his hands. He looked at Maya, then at us. "I don't care," Leo said. He shrugged, and it wasn't an act. It was genuine indifference. "He's just a guy I used to know. He's not my dad. You guys are my parents." He looked at me, then at Chloe. "You two did all the work. He doesn't get to show up in the fourth quarter and claim the trophy." Maya nodded. "Yeah, if he shows up, we call the police. Simple." I looked at Chloe, and tears filled my eyes. We had been so afraid of this day for 7 years. We had worried that his charisma would pull them back in, that he would manipulate them. But we had done our job too well. We had raised children who were smart, strong, and able to see the truth. Mark had no power here. He was a stranger to them. And that was the greatest revenge of all.
I saw him one last time. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There were no screaming matches, no police sirens, and no lawyers in expensive suits. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 6 months after his release. I was at the grocery store, the same one where years ago I had walked with my head held high while the town whispered about me. I was loading bags into the trunk of my car. Chloe was in the passenger seat. We were planning a surprise birthday party for Leo, who was turning 16. I felt eyes on me. You know that feeling? That prickle on the back of your neck? I turned around. Standing across the parking lot near the cart return was a man. He was wearing a faded windbreaker and jeans that looked a little too loose. His hair was gray now, thinning significantly on top. He was holding a plastic bag with a single loaf of white bread and a jar of peanut butter. It was Mark. He wasn't the dashing architect in the Italian suit anymore. He wasn't the mysterious secret agent. He was just a middle-aged man who looked tired and defeated. Our eyes locked across the rows of parked cars. In that moment, I expected to feel something. I searched my heart for anger, for fear, even for pity. But there was nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. It was like looking at an old photograph of a person you barely remember meeting. He took a half step forward, his mouth opening as if he wanted to call out my name. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Maybe he wanted to ask about Maya. Maybe he just wanted to hear a familiar voice. I didn't give him the chance. I didn't glare. I didn't run. I simply turned my back on him. I got into the driver's seat, closed the door, and started the engine. "Who was that?" Chloe asked, glancing at the rearview mirror as I pulled out. I looked in the mirror one last time. Mark was still standing there, watching us drive away, watching the family he threw away, the wives he pitted against each other, leaving him behind in a cloud of exhaust. "Nobody," I said, smiling at her. "Just a ghost."
We drove home to a house full of noise and life. My sister Sarah was there. Mark's parents, Brenda and George, were arguing playfully over the best way to frost the cake. Maya and Leo were in the living room, laughing at some video on their phones. This was the victory. It wasn't the money we got back. It wasn't the years he spent in prison. It was this house. It was the fact that despite his best efforts to destroy us, to isolate us, and to make us feel worthless, we had built something stronger than he could ever imagine. I looked at Maya. She was 16 now, beautiful and fierce. She didn't have a father in the traditional sense, but she had a mother. She had an Auntie Chloe. She had grandparents who adored her. She had a brother who would walk through fire for her. She was whole. That night, after the candles were blown out and the cake was eaten, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea. The summer crickets were chirping. The air smelled of honeysuckle. I thought back to that cold, sterile hospital room where this all began. The silence, the rejection, the feeling that my life was over before it had even really started. I wish I could go back to that young woman. I wish I could hold her hand and tell her it's going to be okay. He isn't the sun. He's just a cloud passing through. You are the sky, and the sky remains. Mark thought he could break me by saying the baby wasn't his. He thought that by stripping away his name and his money, he would leave us with nothing. But he was wrong. He gave me the greatest gift of all. By walking out that door, he made room for the people who actually deserved to be in our lives. He made room for the truth. And the truth is, family isn't about whose DNA you share. It isn't about a marriage certificate or a last name. Family is about who stays. Family is about who shows up when the house is empty and the bank account is dry. Family is the people who help you pick up the pieces and glue them back together into a mosaic that is more beautiful than the original picture ever was. Mark Davis is out there somewhere, living his small, lonely life. He has his secrets, I'm sure. He has his lies. But me, I have the truth. And I have my family. And that is more than enough. You know, looking back on it all now, it's strange how clarity comes with time. When you're in the middle of the storm, all you can hear is the thunder. You can't imagine a day when the sun will shine again. Mark's biggest mistake wasn't the cheating. It wasn't even the money. It was thinking that women are weak. He thought that if he pitted Chloe and me against each other, we would tear each other apart. He thought we would fight over the scraps of his affection. But he forgot one thing. Shared pain doesn't always create enemies. Sometimes it creates the strongest allies you'll ever know. There are a lot of people out there like Mark, people who treat relationships like transactions, people who lie so easily that they start to believe it themselves. They leave a trail of wreckage behind them and then play the victim when the consequences catch up. So, if you are going through something like this right now, if you are sitting in a room feeling abandoned, or if you've discovered a betrayal that takes your breath away, I want you to know something. You are not the things that have been done to you. His rejection does not define your worth. His absence does not make you incomplete. It just means you have an empty chair at your table. And honey, that is an opportunity to invite someone better to sit down. It took me a long time to forgive. Not to forgive him. I don't think he deserves that. And frankly, I don't think he cares. But to forgive myself. For a long time, I blamed myself. Was I too boring? Was I not enough? Did I miss the signs? But the trash didn't leave because the house was dirty. The trash left because it was trash. So I want to ask you a question today. It's a hard one, but I want you to really think about it. If you found out today that your entire life was built on a lie, that the person you trusted most was a stranger, would you have the strength to let it burn down, or would you try to live in the ashes just to keep up appearances? I chose to let it burn down, and in the ashes, I planted a garden. Let me know what you would do in the comments below. And if this story touched you, or if you've ever had to rebuild your life after a betrayal, please share your story. We read them and we care. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, the truth might hurt for a minute, but a lie will hurt you for a lifetime. Bless you.